All right, so again, welcome. Thank you for joining the Semantix webinar on software and app localization. My name is Christian Schnarke. I'm the head of the Applanga technology division, which is also a division of TransPerfect, which Semantix is also part of, like the same big family of companies. I'm based out of Berlin, Germany. We have joined TransPerfect now nearly 5 years ago, and have become more and more a part of the what is called the Global Link technology suite. So these are terms that might come up over the course of the seminar. Besides semantics, you might hear TransPerfect, or you might hear Global Link. That's kind of all the same umbrella. One is the parent company, the other is the overarching technology suite, which we are a part of. But these are kind of to set the scene of what I might be mentioning. Today, we want to go through a small agenda, but hopefully like the items itself will be plentiful. So we have basics on software localization, where I go through some basic concepts, paradigms, setups, principles, kind of that you get a high-level overview what you have to consider if you think about software localization. Some of it might be super obvious, some of it might be a nice repetition, some of it might be new. I hope helpful either way. And then we go into what Applanga is, because specifically for the purpose of software localization, we built this technology, and and been improving, being adding to it, have seen a lot of different use cases, a lot of different kinds of software that need to be localized. Just recently, we had a discussion with a client of ours who will be presenting at the Global Link Technology Conference, Global Link Next in New York this year. The client of ours called Royal Caribbean. It's a cruise ship company. They were our client before we joined TransPerfect even. They kind of brought us together, even that will be the story they will be presenting on. And we built technology for them to run on ship servers. So, because obviously people on ships use apps nowadays as well to kind of access the ship's entertainment system, book a table at the restaurant, and take part in activities, but there is no internet, like not regular internet, at least on ships. So we had to build something that runs on ship servers so that the applications on the ship are kind of have access to the latest translations. Royal Caribbean people working on the application on land can provide to them. And funnily enough, that was not even the first piece of technology we built to customize for ship-bound apps. So, like as I said, we have seen a lot of localization and software pieces that needed translation over the years, and this is kind of distilled of what we learned, and I hope you like it too. Let's start with the basics of software localization, some foundations. First and foremost, software needs to be ready for localization, which means the content needs to what's generally talked about or known as externalized. So no technology, no workflow, no translation can be happen if the text is what is called hard-coded, which luckily not happening so much anymore today. That's just meaning a developer who built the application has, instead of putting the translatable content into a separate file where it's specifically stored for the purpose of here's my English content, and then I can add the file for the Spanish, German, Swedish content as well. Instead, they just wrote text like right into the code itself, which means it cannot be replaced by anybody else than just somebody actually manually copy pasting into the code. That's also the worst kind of setup for the person building the application to work with, but that's what the basics are of software needs to be ready for localization. There are also other considerations that are very specific on what kind of application you build, but nowadays there are a lot of standardized frameworks that come also with standardized localization best practices. So there are developer documentations that say, like, if you want to localize your app, here are some principles you follow on top of having your strings externalized in these string files. The string files can differ from different applications. If it's an iOS application, it's maybe a .strings file, or for Android XML, or a JSON file, can be even Excel or CSV. Most important, though, is always that it breaks down to what is called key value pairs. So then instead of the text that is in the code itself, there is an ID and unique identifier or key that says this is the text that goes here, and then associated with the key is the value, meaning that the kind of the key value pair. That's what it's in the string file. The key is the unique identifier, and the value is the corresponding string that goes into either English, the source language, the language the application is built, and then all the translations or targets. So this is the key and all its values, English and all its translations. These key value pairs is what is the basis of software localization, the basis of externalizing the content and what is stored in these string files. So that's kind of the expressions that you might hear, that needs to be ready for localization, that the strings need to be externalized, that we need to have key value pairs, and that you have values, source, target. These are all kind of expressions that revolve around the content actually being able to be extracted, translated, and put back into the application by any means whatsoever. Then what has to be considered is that translation will have an impact on the user experience. And obviously that's often comes up when we talk about return of investment. So should I translate my application, and what impact that will have on users in the country where they speak that language? Like they will have easier access, they might be easier times to find the application itself, feel more comfortable with it, if there's kind of a trust-based component. But what also needs to be considered is that there is a negative impact, or meaning like an impact that needs effort to resolve for translation. First, there are like language-specific considerations for text formatting. For example, there are the famous right-to-left language that go into the other direction, which not only requires a font to be inside the application that supports that language, but also potentially that the UI elements itself can be flipped. So if you would, for example, have in a regular left to right kind of language build application, English build application, that you would expect to kind of have like a fold out menu to the left, where you can then press to see the kind of like different options, while on the flip side, you would then expect actually that menu to be on the other side, because like it would be kind of from the direction of the UI flow would expect that on the other side, or the orientations of buttons. That has to be considered. Different date formats, different currencies, all of those need to be supported, because maybe the font that you use to display your application looks great, but does not support all these different values. And then the other point is text expansion. So English is comparably a short language, not as short as, for example, some of the Asian languages. They have their own challenges with the specific alphabet and the text orientation, but generally English is one of the, at least if we look at the Latin alphabet, that more of the shorter kind of language. Normally we say for nearly everything else, you will have a text expansion from 30 to 50 or even maybe 70%. And that needs to be accounted for either by having the UI being very adaptive, so that the UI can expand, the buttons can get bigger, the text is not overflowing, nothing is breaking, nothing is kind of flowing into each other. In that regard, that needs to be considered either to begin with when you design the application, or it needs to be considered that there needs to be time when the translation comes back. Somebody has to go through and fix all these issues with that somebody, most likely be a developer, so one of the most expensive and scarce resources you have anyways. Which all brings us to the last point, might already be kind of notable from what I said in these other points, that you need time and effort for proper localization, which is finally kind of one of the biggest problems, because the time frame that you normally have for localization is kind of the same time frame that you have for QA, which means everything that should go into you release, you build, you update, or whatever you want to kind of put out, it can only be really translated when all the features and thereby the text is ready and final. Obviously, there's always kind of last minute changes and all of that, but still the English needs to be somewhat final to be translatable. So you have to wait until the development is done. But then when the development is done, it most likely already took longer than expected. And there was a promised release date. We're getting pretty close to it. So there's a time squeeze on the translation process. So if you consider these principles to begin with and kind of plan and account for it, not only in how you build your application, but also the kind of design application, build your application, but also kind of run your release cycles, you have a way easier time than kind of noticing last minute. So, oh, we also need to translate. Oh, that also takes time. Oh, the translation come back and now there is an impact on the application that needs to be also considered. So there's a lot of front loading you can do by just being aware that there are these challenges and then baking them into your design, development, and release principles. What we try to achieve normally is continuous localization, which means like the whole process of localizing the application repeats itself. All software nowadays most often lives in a kind of update cycle kind of world where every so often there will be a new update, there will be a patch, there will be new features, there will be changes in layout, in user flow. Software is developing and evolving all the time. It's not kind of like a ship and done kind of thing. So it also means that you basically start a translation process from the beginning again and again. However, obviously it adapts in scope and volume depending on what the change is. So if you start out in the beginning and you start right away with 20 languages, obviously there's a lot of stuff that needs to be happening in the beginning, but then there will be updates every other month or every month or every 2 weeks maybe. And a couple of strings will be changed, a couple of strings will be added that need to go through the process again. So that maintenance might be small, but then you decide to go into 3, 4, 5, 6 more markets, and then you have more of a bigger kind of batch of stuff that you have to go through. So your process should be account for that, should be kind of flexible, should be kind of embedded into the regular release cycle of applications. The development cycle of application is normally also continuous. So you have continuous software development while you also then try to do continuous software localization and marry these processes as much as possible. We see here the typical steps that we would see. As part of it, we have this color separation and kind of the lower part of the circle being separated here because you might not always have the time, you might not always be as sophisticated to do that, because like there's two worlds. One is like the perfect world that we all strive to as professionals to achieve best practices, and then there's the world where deadlines are tight, everybody is late, things come in between, and we just have to get stuff out. And in between these two worlds, these two kind of repeated cycles sit. Like the lower part, as you see, is about like once the translation, like you actually have the translation, it's kind of half the rent. You still have to go and validate that the translation are actually doing what they're supposed to, like the communicating the user experience, communicating what can be done in the application in a coherent way that aligns with what the design principle and the purpose of the application is. And there are ways of how you can help conveying that as context into the translation process, but there's probably no complete guarantee that even with perfect context, you don't still have to do a review and maybe even 1 or 2 review or revision cycles where you look at the content in a context that is available, be that testing, be that review, be that just text or in context review, to go through the content, go through the translations again for the purpose of finding linguistic issues, but also the functional issues, like I said, with the overflow of the text, for example, to go through that again until everything is resolved and you can release. Obviously, that might take some time, and as we said, maybe your release cycles are tight. You don't have the time, so you do that only every so often. Maybe only if you do new languages, or every kind of quarter, every half year you go through a bigger kind of retesting purpose, because now you have enough kind of changes occurred in the application that you want to go retest everything. With certain setups, you can also just test very small kind of deltas, like the changes between one release and the other. You maybe have ways, and there are definitely ways to set it up in a way that you say, like, okay, only these 10 strings of the latest updates I will now, after they're translated, test them, review them, adapt them, retest them, confirm, and then ship them. Ideally, you have a way, and we will talk about how that is possible. You have a way of kind of decoupling your translation release cycle from your app release cycle, meaning that you, as a localization professional, as somebody who's in charge of the application being translated, you have a way to not have to delay the release of the application just so people can wait for the translation. And you also have a way to not have to wait to get translation updates out to the application until the next release cycle, because otherwise that may be meaning there's a typo directly on the landing page in Arabic, and you can only fix it in 1.5 months when the next release comes out. And for that long, as the person being in charge of the translation quality of the application, everybody can kind of point to you to say, okay, this is your fault. Why does it look like that? Might have an impact, might not, but obviously, ideally, as somebody who being in charge of something, you also want to have access and control over the thing that you are in charge of, and that a localization process that is set up and designed and structured for that should give you that power. There are three main stakeholders, which are a general description of different actual jobs that personas or even groups under the hood. But generally, we talk about developers, business users, and translators. Developers is everybody who builds the application. That might also include QA designers, UX designers, product managers, so everybody who is concerned about actually building the application itself, and all of that that's already on their shoulders, that now also have to carry parts of the translation localization process. Business users, which is broadly, again, everybody who owns the translation process. This can also be the product managers. They're on both sides, right? Can also be country managers, release managers, marketing managers, or generally anybody who has kind of like an interest on the economic success in a certain region that kind of in a wider or narrower scope includes translating the application in a certain way. And then translators who are in charge of transferring the content from one language to another, and whatever workflow steps are included into that. So for translators, we not only talk about like a physical person who does the translation, who just sits there and translate a word into the other language, but can also be your product manager on the vendor side, like somebody when you work with Semantix, for example. These are the translators, like, but they go over the over your contact in the client services side through the product manager, the project manager, the translator, the linguists, like all of the people who kind of are in part of doing the translation work. These are what we generally sum up as translators. And then we try to cater for their specific needs, kind of with a specific lens. For developers, we're looking at integration and automation. So a way of for not having them do manual work, because they also, I would say, as a general personality trait, don't like to do manual work. But also, obviously, we want to kind of not bog them down, because they probably have enough to do, and you probably need more developers anyways. We don't want to bog them down with mundane tasks. So we want to offer them ways of automating this process as much as possible, so that they don't have to think about getting the translatable content into the translation process, and they don't have to think about receiving the translations back into the way that they kind of get the application out of the door, so that that is embedded as much as possible, and also giving them obviously the freedom to decide how that is best for their organization, the setup that is there, the kind of like the whole what we call CDCI, so continuous integration, continuous development pipeline where there are kind of build processes, release processes running, and when there might be like a specific step that might be ideal to now get a translation. And that's what they should be able to kind of configure, set up, and that's where they come in basically. For business users, it's about overview and access. So it's about finding out what has a translation, what needs a translation, where are we in the translation process, what do I need to do to push this further ahead in the process, what is my process, all of kind of like the observer eye kind of level where we can understand what is going on right now and what is kind of the deadlines that I need to keep and where are we in contact to that. It can also be that it goes down to nitty gritty of like, has my content all the metadata that it needs to be correctly translated? But it can be a very narrow focus of just, I need this translated. How long does it take? Up to, I have a very complex workflow and like very specific steps along the way, along where my content comes from, where it goes into the system, because it needs to be further adapted, changed, reviewed. All of that is kind of business user, where we say from the most basic workflow to the most complex workflow, being able to build and to access and to observe that. That's what the business user normally do. And then it depends again on what exactly the translation scope is, which also brings me to the translators who need to understand what is the scope and the context. So understand what they need to translate, how long it takes, or kind of what kind of timeline they have, and then most importantly, understand what they are translating exactly. So what it is that they see in front of them. If it's just small text pieces, they might as well be producing the same quality as machine translation, because only when I get like sufficient context, I can understand if a back button that I just see as the word back means actually my physical back on the back side of my body, or going back to another page of the menu that I have been before. So in some languages, in English, there is a lot of overlap. Other languages also, the same word might have two meanings. So there is a lot of things that can go quote unquote wrong in the translation process if context is missing. So if we look at these different stakeholders, we look at helping them with these needs if we are trying to design a perfect localization process. And again, perfect is the overall end goal to we maybe never achieve, but that's things we keep in mind, and then we try to find the smallest common denominator to get everything rolling and maybe extend from there. So again, a word of kind of coming from kind of several years of app localization, you always should start from a place of best practice, break it down to what I can do quickly, and then step by step build up and enhance processes until you reach the process that gives you the perfect level of translation for your setup and for your needs. And you have to balance out there always diminishing returns of putting in more and more effort to reach 100%. So 60 to 70% is maybe pretty quickly done. 70 to 80 requires work, and then everything from 80 to 100, every percentage point of improvement might require a lot of work from all stakeholders involved. So there's always needs to be a balance. There might be quick wins here and there still, but we might always be useful to take a step back and see how much more effort can I put into this, how much better I will make it. But that's just something that comes over time, being in the process itself. Having said all that, where I'm personally coming from, obviously, is a point of having seen this myself and then thought about how I would like to have it solved, and then over the years now also have seen how what is the common denominator of many people who build applications and how they would like to solve it, and building technology around that, which is the Applanga localization and translation management platform nowadays. We also exactly cater to these three main stakeholders. For developers, we have all kinds of different integrations. Developers nowadays also encompasses designers, UX designers, for us who are like the creators of the content, building the application. For them, we have like a plethora of different integration options where they can pick and choose and combine to see fit. We have a web-based TMS and context editor for the business users and the translators who work on the side of the client itself. So all the kind of building out all the workflows, working on the content, from copywriting over to translating and reviewing all of it in the same place. And then being part of TransPerfect, we obviously seamlessly connect to all the different production hubs all over the world, Semantix being one of them. So if you have an application and you want to work with Semantix on the translation process, Applanga would be the connector to kind of help you get the content to a translatable and localization workflow ready stage, but also pass it over to your production partner on the services side inside TransPerfect seamlessly, so that everybody kind of looks in the same place. There are no email attachment and outdated Excel lists attached to emails going back and forth that needs to be changed and have to be converted back with kind of like a script that nobody maintains anymore into a JSON file that nobody can open. So like getting rid of all of that is basically like all the pain points, all the little manual stuff, getting that out of the way. That was the idea by having these kind of feature sets for the translator, for the business user, and for the developer. And then all of that is built that either of these kind of needs that are kind of put towards the localization process can be scaled accordingly. So if you have a lot of applications, if you have a huge user base that needs content delivered to them immediately, if you have very complicated workflows, if you have so many languages to support, so many updates all the time, and specific translation requirements, all of these are directions in which the platform scales after an initial integration, can be further extended with more features and more use cases. And also all of these use cases can scale accordingly. That's what we try to do from a technology side. For the integration side, on the developer facing end, we have three main parts. Mobile SDKs, that's where we originally started. Like as we started building this company, mobile apps were the hip thing, the startup thing. Everybody was building mobile apps at the time, so that's where we're coming from. That's why we also have the strongest feature set on the SDK side. The command line interface is for integrations in the CD/CI process, as well as repositories like GitHub and something like that. When you say like, as part of my development process, whenever I push new code to be saved in the repository, I also take the newest strings, the newest translatable content, and put that in Applanga. And whenever I make a release, I also get the latest translations to put them in my app. And then the REST API basically can do the same as the other two integrations to kind of push and pull from and to the platform whenever I see fit, but also kind of remote control many parts of the application. What we also see on the dashboard, read all different kind of fields. What's the status of the string in this project? Please set a new status, add a tag, remove a screenshot, download something, upload something. That ought to be done through the API. Again, developers like to have it their way, like set it up so it fits the application development reality that they have built, that they want to work with. And in that reality, they can then go to Applanga and pick and choose the different integrations and say, like, from this integration, I want to have this feature, but I don't want that, so that can be disabled, but I need this other one here, so they can combine them as they see fit. We have them all openly documented. There are integration examples for all these different integrations in our own repository. So there are little applications that show how all these integrations work on a little small example application, and a lot of documentation just how these will all interact with the use cases that you might specifically have. As I said, the SDKs are our premier integration option, like the oldest one, the most built out one, the most kind of feature-packed ones, if you can say. They were built in a way that you just kind of put them in your mobile app once as a developer, and then all the steps that are part of what I showed earlier with the continuous localization workflow are covered, meaning the SDKs automatically extract the content from the application while the developer just uses it, uses the code of the application in the regular day-to-day. It will just kind of grab the content out of the app, and that just means they just develop the app as they would normally. So if you follow the principles, for example, that Apple or Google layout of how to build an iOS or Android application, including how you localize it. You just put in the SDK and it finds the content in the places that would be expected if you follow those best practices. On top of that, not only can you upload content, you can also capture context from the application, meaning screenshots. The SDKs, because they are there in the application, when you take the screenshot, they know which text is on the screenshot at the moment and can capture that information as well and pass it along. And also, obviously, because they are Applanga SDKs, they know where the content needs to go, so they upload it directly to the project on Applanga. So it kind of takes a lot of pain out of, like, if you normally just take a screenshot, it will be saved on your phone. Then you have to kind of get it off your phone, put it into a place associated with the content that is out there. All of that the SDK can do just by the embedded feature set. Just you press a button on the phone, it will take the screenshot, upload it to Applanga. You can also kind of preview your translations from the platform with any app that is integrated with the SDK. So you can open the app running on your phone, press a couple of fingers on the screen for some time, which will open an Applanga mode, which then allows you to pull translations that are not already live, not yet published to your users, but you just preview them on your phone or on your build, like on device testing that even has a Jira integration to create a ticket for a bug inside the app itself. So it's very convenient for on-device testing. And finally, the over-the-air updates, which is something you can also do with, for example, an API integration, which most web CMSs do, that you just have an interface, in that case, the Applanga dashboard, where you can go, you can edit your translation, you can press a button, and the next time the app started will actually download that content from Applanga and show it to the user. So what I talked about earlier about this localization process, where you kind of are under pressure to either not further delay an upcoming release just because of translation, or where you have to wait for the next release just to fix a translation, that is both solved by using the SDK simply by the principle of the over-the-air updates. So you can go inside the dashboard, make a change, press the button, and the app will download that translation and save it again locally, so that it doesn't have to be waiting for the next release cycle. And all of that is combined in all of these SDKs that we offer for all of these different platforms that we see here: iOS, Android, Flutter, React Native, Xamarin, and Unity. They all have somewhat of the same feature set. All of those that we see here, a couple differentiate. Nowadays, there are many different permutations of iOS, many different permutations of Android. We support all of them. There are some drawbacks here and there for some of the features, but like doing that for all these years, there's a lot of things that we have seen in customizations or adaptations that we have incorporated to cater to all these kind of different applications somebody can build and offer this kind of feature set, making static content that would normally live inside a file in an application dynamic by automatically uploading it, adding all this additional functionality to it, and then also sending it back directly to your users, and even millions of that if that's what you have, that then the architecture can support that. What we see more and more, and what I already mentioned earlier, like nowadays we see the developer and the designer kind of as this kind of same stakeholder group, like the people building the application. Figma, Sketch, Adobe XD over the last 2 to 3 years, and specifically Figma nowadays, have reached kind of ubiquity. Kind of everybody uses it, right? Where the designers work very closely with the developers, where the look and feel of the application is there already very early on, and where then not quickly after this became kind of popular, the question arose, like, how do we incorporate that in the localization process? So we built plugins for all these different design tools that help you to extract the translatable content, so the text of the Figma file, also take screenshots of these different screens that we see here. So it kind of depends a little bit on the layout, but it will kind of go over, find what is the screen inside a Figma design and take that screenshot and, like as I explained with the SDK functionality, like associate all the text that is on the screen with the screenshot it's taken, and then you can go through the translation process with that already. In the kind of least exciting scenario, that just means you want to have your design translated already. So you download the translations back into your design, and then you can already see how, for example, text expansion would impact your design. You can adjust the layouts. But what's more and more, or what most people would like to achieve, is that there's a handover from the design stage over to the developers. That needs to happen anyways, where also the content and maybe even already the translations themselves can be kind of uploaded from Figma to Applanga and then downloaded into the application, which is a file format change, so to speak, but also includes a lot of content formatting, because some stuff that would be in the design, just plain text, would need to be differently formatted to be put into an application. There needs to be these key value pairs created that I talked about in the beginning. It's not just text, it also needs an identifier associated with all of that. We also help to make happen from like going from Figma over to the application, but also obviously very interesting is that you can get the screenshots on a very early stage for the context for the translation process itself, to help people understand what they're building, because until the developers are ready to kind of create screenshots of the application, the content might already be ready, the application not so much. So you can front load the translation process. You don't have to necessarily wait until everything is built out. You can maybe already start at this design stage, and that's becoming more and more popular, aside from Figma being more and more used for other things as well, from documents, websites, applications, interfaces of all kinds. So we think we are in a good place to be here with the plugins, and then it goes either back into Figma or into an application. Now that we have everything on the platform, how do we get into the translation process? And then it's kind of what we said about being part of the TransPerfect family. In the back, it connects to any production hub around the world. Semantix here in Europe and all over the world, production centers and production groups of TransPerfect use Applanga as kind of the connector between the client that has the application and needs Applanga for whatever other reason, but also as passing over, way to pass over the content seamlessly into the production process. So there's an integrated interface to just say like, order this, and it sends over just the content that is in scope. So just like the 5 strings that are new and the 6 that have changed in Spanish into the production process. It's a very concise way of handing over the content. We don't need to do anything further with it. There's no processing, analysis, or anything that needs to happen. We get just what we need to translate. We don't need to find it among the like huge Excel file you send over to say like, hey, here we made changes and added something, figure it out. We just figured it out by you just pressing a button. And then everything that you upload to the platform, we talked about screenshots that can be also additional context information that you attach, like physically add a PDF to say like, this is the user journey document, but also like you can set string length restrictions, you can set additional descriptions, developer comments, all of that context you can add through an integration to Applanga. You can see in Applanga itself and adapt and manage it, but it's also passed on seamlessly to the linguist so that there is no 40-page PDF document where they say that here are all the screenshots of the application. You as the translator have a file with Excel and strings, and then you have this PDF with the screenshots. You figure out yourself what belongs to what. No, the way we put the translations kind of in the translation process to the linguist from our side automatically adds the context to it so that they, when they access the content for translation, they see it. Obviously, that brings down the translation cost, that brings down the back and forth that you maybe have to where linguists would try to understand what it is that you're offering, what it is that you are translating, so it can reduce turnaround, improve the quality, and reduce developer cost accordingly. If you want to work on Applanga yourself, here we have a little preview of the interface. That's what we call the editor interface, where you can go and work on the content. If you work with any kind of cut tool or any kind of translation management platform, you kind of know what to expect. It's like anything that you would need to work on that content, and working on the content is very broadly defined, of like from source editing to translating yourself to reviewing the content and everything in between, going back and forth of these steps, enhancing the content, right? Like adding screenshots to it or managing screenshots, adding workflow states, slicing and dicing, filtering, creating these orders, everything that can be done through the interface. And then it can be any mixture of like inside of Applanga. For some languages, I translate myself, some languages I order, some languages I machine translate, some languages I review myself, some languages I have a partner that I give access to Applanga for them to review the content there. I have people that I want to do in context review, I have people I want to do testing. All of that can be performed through the interface, and the developers, the business users, and the translators, if they are not on the vendor side, on the services side, but more on your side, they have the same interface, but a lot of specific features for everybody to use. For the developers, everything that you see here is also data. It's accessible through an integration, so they can read what is in there, overwrite what is in there, add a translation, download a translation, add a screenshot, create a subset of the strings that they want to upload, download, change. All of that is possible. The business user can see what is translated, filter for, give me everything untranslated, put it into an order, and a translator can say, show me everything that I need to translate and how it was translated before and what I should do with it. So that's all what we try to achieve with a single interface, a single platform, as a translation interface, but it's the same way also as a review interface. So again, you can do any part of the translation or review workflow steps on Applanga, or you can do it using Applanga as the way to send that content over to your service partner on the TransPerfect side to produce the translation, to review the translation. But we also, as a vendor, use the platform ourselves to maybe perform work for you. So it's not unusual, for example, for our testing team to use Applanga and the build of the application that they receive from a client to kind of perform the testing more efficiently. We have a lot of medical use cases where screenshot review is actually required. So Applanga is used as the interface for our specialist linguists to work on this medical content review and produce like reviewed and approved and then certified translation packages in the end. So there's a lot of room of being like, I don't even use the editor I use the editor to perform complex use cases. And it's all kind of in between, right? Like with the integrations, with all the business user use cases, with all the translator use cases. As I said in the beginning, there are certain stakeholders and there are certain needs that they have. And then you need to see which of them do I need to fulfill to achieve the translation quality, the translation turnaround times that I need. And accordingly, we build the platform to be flexible to accommodate from the easiest and quickest to the most complex that you can potentially think of, or that I think we have seen already, but that's where we're coming from. And with that, we are at a good point in time to finish the presentation, and I would now take any questions that you might have. Generally speaking, if you have interest in learning more, Applanga, please approach your Semantix contact, who will be happy to get in touch with my team to see if we can schedule a demo, or if we have any questions before, and we can point you to any examples. We have an Applanga website that we maybe add to the information that we send out afterwards or next to the recording that you have, that we will receive and that we will be creating from this. And yeah, there's a free account as well. So let me check some of the questions here. So how long does the translation process normally take for an average size app? So that's a great question that I completely understand. But the very frustrating response to that is it depends. It depends on obviously like the word count and the target languages that you want to go into, and then kind of the translation quality that you achieve by prepping the translation process and kind of running through additional review rounds, for example. All of that might potentially make it longer. There are ways to agree on service level agreements. So have SLAs in place that say, if I have below 2,000 words, I expect them back in 2 days, and that's kind of the baseline that the production team will work then, and we obviously help them to get there. Definitely, it will not be lost in the process. It will not be lost on an email attachment. It will directly go from Applanga to them. So definitely the communication will be clear and the handover will be clear, but we ourselves have little impact on the turnaround itself. So the other next question is, can I make changes to the original or source content? What happens if you do in terms of the translation process? So you can edit, like the editor that I showed, that you can work on any of the target languages, any of the translations, but you can also work on the source itself. So the source content is also in scope for editing. So if you do copywriting, or if you more likely have changes to an existing string, you can do that, and we will track the source changes according to your translation. That means you initially create an English text as part of your development process. So now that comes up to Applanga, you send it for translation, we translate it, comes back, but now you change the English. You still have a translation now, but that translation might not be chiming anymore with the source that you have changed now. So via the order interface, is very easy to send everything that has changed in that way. We call it outdated over to your production partners again. So you don't need to keep track of your changes. You can just go ahead, change something, and the next time you make a request, it's automatically captured part of the scope of what will be translated. Do you order translations in the tool issue? Do you have to pay for both the tool and the translations? So yes, there's an order interface that also has like a lot of options again, to set a very specific scope, a very specific set of languages, and even kind of add additional context to it. However, there will always be like a combination of a technology fee for Applanga and the service fee if you choose to order translation. We have some clients who use Applanga to translate themselves. We have some clients who use it just as a tool to request translations and everything in between. There is some baseline pricing on our website, but if you are considering using Applanga and also working with any transperfect company like Semantix, for example, for the translation process, we can make kind of like a bundled offer that will then depend on the amount of content and your technology needs together, and kind of make a bundled package out of that. All right, and I think that were already all the questions for today. Thank you for joining today. Thanks for your interest.